Hello everyone, bringing you a video today looking at a recreation of a British corporal serving out in Malaya in the early 1950s. Now, the Malayan emergency is something that's been considered on the channel previously. Some of the kit and so forth that's going to be looked at in the video has been covered in more detail as well. 1944 pattern web equipment, Indian-made jungle green uniform. This draws together some of those items and looks at them worn together as one set of kit and equipment. It's an interesting mix of newer and older components. There was something of a transition going on at this time period in the early 1950s. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the main part of the video now. In the recreation here, you can see a mix of kit and equipment, and the fact I'm recreating an NCO here gives a little bit more opportunity to look at some bits and pieces you wouldn't necessarily see generally carried by a private soldier. The uniform is somewhat older, certainly the bush jacket is. We'll get onto that in just a minute. Whereas the web equipment is the 1944 pattern, and that was essentially the most up-to-date equipment the British Army had at the time. So we'll get into this now and have a look at the various bits of the uniform and equipment in more detail. We'll start with the weapon carried before moving on to the kit and clothing. And in this instance, we have the Mark V Sten. Now, this has been slightly changed in outline from the Second World War issue when it was introduced, in that the front pistol grip has been removed, which was essentially standard practice post-Second World War. It's carried here on its sling, as you can see. The Sten was not a popular weapon in the jungle and would be commonly replaced by commercially purchased M1 carbines and the Owen machine carbine provided by the Australians. We'll start at the top as we normally do, and you can see here the ubiquitous British jungle hat. This was of a design which had been introduced at the very end of the Second World War and would continue in use right the way through into the 1970s. It's a very simple design with a relatively high crown, ventilation eyelets in the sides. This particular example has actually had the crown stoved in. It's been somewhat set up, not as much as they were later on, but it has been slightly modified in shape, and it's quite effective at the job which it's designed for, which is as a hot weather hat. One other thing to note looking at the close-up here is the fact that I'm not clean shaven, and there is good reason for this. Certainly in Malaya it was found that the smell of shaving soap, and indeed perfumed soaps in general, toothpaste and so forth, could give away a patrol in the jungle, so I have purposefully not shaved here. As already alluded to, the uniform consists of an earlier pattern of bush jacket. This is the jungle green bush jacket, introduced in the latter days of the Second World War, and it's of Indian manufacture. There were still some of these in stock at the time, and certainly some men who'd already been issued them clung onto them. They were a very popular piece of clothing, so that's what's being worn here. And the trousers are from one of the early post-war British jungle uniforms, something that's colloquially referred to as the 1947 pattern in collecting circles. This isn't an official designation. The trousers were officially referred to by their colour code of SCC 19, but the 1947 pattern designation, which is used informally, comes from the year that they were first introduced. So you have a mixed uniform here. There was also a bush jacket as part of the, quote, 1947 pattern, but that's not being worn here. The older Indian-made bush jacket is being worn in its place. A detail of the bush jacket here, which is relatively unusual to see at the time, is insignia worn on the arms, and you can see we have the corporal's chevrons here in white tape sewn directly onto the bush jacket. The wearing of insignia was very limited in the field in Malaya. There were various forms of subdued insignia. These are actually quite bright and visible compared to some of the rank insignia which would be seen at the time. A piece of equipment we'll consider before looking at the rest of the web equipment is a small map case. This forms part of the late war jungle equipment, of which the 1944 pattern web equipment is part. And you can see that's carried here on a length of cod line. It's quite similar to the small map cases which were often private purchased by British officers going back to the First World War. It's a very similar pattern to a lot of extant examples of those map case designs. With the map case lifted out of the way, we can see the web equipment at the front here. You can see the two ammunition pouches, or basic pouches as they were referred to. And in addition to this, on the belt, the compass pouch has also been threaded on to allow a prismatic compass to be carried in a convenient place on the front of the belt there, as you can see just below the map case here. 1944 pattern had been relatively recently introduced to operations in Malaya, alongside its introduction into the ongoing Korean conflict as well, to replace 1937 pattern. It would then proceed as something of a theatre issue out in the Far East from this point onwards. Continuing with the web equipment, we look at the back here. We can see the haversack is carried on the back, the two side pouches carrying a mess tin half each, and then the main body filled with rations and then perhaps dry clothing for wear at night. And beneath the body of the pack, the 1944 pattern poncho has been attached using the two lower straps. Beneath the haversack, centred on the belt, the 1944 pattern water bottle and cup are carried in the 1944 pattern carrier, as you can see here, centralised on the belt so it gives an even load. It distributes the weight of the water carried in the bottle a bit more evenly across the equipment. It's quite a comfortable place to carry it. To finish looking at this recreation, we'll consider the footwear, and you can see here the standard British jungle boots of this time period, and these would be worn right the way through into the 1960s and even into the 70s in some instances. They're essentially similar to Converse in that they have a rubber sole, a rubber pad over the ankle bone to give some reinforcement. The body of the boot is made of canvas. These aren't a very good design. They've been covered in a video previously on the channel talking about them in comparison to the US jungle boots of the 1960s. They were still in use in the 1960s, of course, these British boots, so that it was a direct comparison in that regard. The canvas swells and holds water, the rubber sole holds water, so the feet are constantly wet. Once you've walked through one puddle or you've forded one stream, your feet will remain wet, and obviously in the humid conditions of the jungle, the boots don't dry out, so foot rot was a major problem. They are soft and flexible, they have a rubber sole, so there is some grip to them and so forth in comparison to the standard GS or ammunition boots which were issued at the time for other theatres, but nevertheless they are not an effective boot for what they're really designed for, which is for use in the tropics. They are a flawed design, but that's what's worn here, and they were standard at the time. So we'll take one more look at the overview here, showing the kit and the uniform worn together. Fairly typical look for British soldiers out in Malaya at this time period. So there we are. I hope you found it interesting looking at that. I've certainly enjoyed putting this video together. It's a style of video I'm hoping to make more of going forward. It's certainly, I think, a good way of showing off the kit and equipment. I certainly hope it is anyway, and I hope it's been of interest, as I say. If it has and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, then please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the little notification button down below, and that will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as ever, a huge thank you to everybody supporting the channel using those two methods. It's greatly appreciated, as I always say. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are all linked down below. And as usual, if you don't use social media, but you'd nevertheless like to get in touch, there is an email address down there as well. But that's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.